Hi, I'm Bernie Mitchell and welcome to this edition of Needle Drop. As you know by now, the Beatles are about my favorite group. And after the Beatles broke up in 1970, each of them had successful solo careers. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one episode for each of them and investigate their post-Beatle breakup career in terms of the albums that they released. Some were great, some were mediocre, and some are downright cringeworthy. Let's start with a man who claimed that he was the leader of the Beatles, at least in early interviews, at which point George Harrison would usually stand up and go, "But we all are." Yep, we're going to talk about John Lennon. Ready to find out what his albums were and how they rank? Okay then, let's drop the needle. So after the Beatles, John Lennon recorded 12 studio albums. Let's take a look at them and I'll rank them from worst to best. On November 11th, 1968, John Lennon recorded his first solo album. It's called Unfinished Music No. 1, Two Virgins. It's an avant-garde experimental mishmash of sound that John and Yoko recorded at his home one night before they made love, only to be discovered the following morning by John's wife. The album is much more known for its controversial cover. The front cover is a photo of John and Yoko staring into the camera, both completely naked with full frontal nudity. The back cover is another nude photo of them, this time from the back. The label EMI refused to distribute it. In the US, it was distributed by an obscure label called Tetragrammaton, and that distributor actually covered the cover with a plain brown paper bag. Music? Well, there really isn't any. It's tape loops, fragments of various instruments, and conversations. Even with the shock value of seeing a Beatle and his girlfriend totally nude, the album did not sell. So the second album is Unfinished Music No. 2, Life with Lions. The cover shows Yoko in her hospital bed and John lying on the floor. The back cover shows them after being arrested for drugs. The tracks are largely forgettable and contain sounds of their baby's heartbeat, 2 minutes of silence, and John tuning a radio dial to various stations. For music, well, just like the first album, there isn't any. Interestingly, this album is released on Zapple Records, which was a subsidiary of Apple. Zapple was intended to be a label for avant-garde music and spoken word records, but it really only lasted for 5 months. And besides Life with Lions, there's only one other Zapple record released, and that was George Harrison's Electronic Sound. In October of 1969, John and Yoko released their third album, and this one is called The Wedding Album. Again, the cover and packaging is more interesting than the recorded sounds. The box includes photos, drawings by Lennon, a reproduction of the marriage certificate, and a picture of a slice of their wedding cake. There's one track on each side of the album. One of the tracks is called John and Yoko, and it's 22 minutes of them whispering, screaming, sing-songing, and saying each other's name. So again, no music. In December of 1969, John and Yoko released Live Peace in Toronto. The band consisted of John, Yoko, Eric Clapton, Klaus Voormann on bass, the old Beatles friend from the Hamburg days, and Alan White on drums. Side 1 rocks with Blue Suede Shoes, Money, Dizzy Miss Lizzie, Your Blues, Cold Turkey, Lennon's new song premiered here, and Give Peace a Chance. Yes, finally a John Lennon album comes out with music. Side 2 belongs with Yoko, with Don't Worry Kyoto, Mummy's Only Looking for Her Hand in the Snow, and John John. John has said he was so energized by doing this gig that when he got back to London, he went in and told the other Beatles that he was quitting the band. They convinced him not to say anything about it. It was in April of 1970 that Paul announced he was leaving the band. 8 months later, in December of 1970, John releases his first post-Beatle breakup album, John Lennon, Plastic Ono Band. It's got raw production and very personal lyrics. All the songs are now considered classics, but my favorites are Mother, I Found Out, Working Class Hero, which I have an interesting story about. When I was a disc jockey at the radio station, we had 3 turntables, and the idea was you'd put a record on one turntable, it would be the one that was playing on the air, and then you could queue up 2 other records so that you could do segues between them. I discovered with Working Class Hero, because it's an acoustic song, if I queued up two records on two turntables of Working Class Hero, put the needle at the start of the groove, started both the records at the same time, but held my finger against the edge of one of the records turning to slow it down just a little bit, what would happen is the record would go out of phase. And when it would go out of phase, you'd get this swirling sound going on as John was singing. It was very trippy. And I did that a number of times because I thought it was so cool. One time when I did it on the radio station, the hotline phone rang, and it was a marketing guy from Capitol Records, and he was saying, "Don't do that anymore. People are calling us, asking us when we're going to release that version of Working Class Hero. And of course, we have no intention of doing it. So please don't do it on the radio anymore." Other favorite songs are Remember, Well, 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 Look at Me, and God, which contains the litany of things that John Lennon said he no longer believes in, including the infamous line where he says, "I don't believe in Beatles." In 1971, John releases Imagine. It's got a great title track, obviously one of his classics. The album also contains How to Use Sleep, a scathing attack on Paul McCartney. It was John's first #1 album, and he would only have 2 more in his lifetime. In that same year, John and Yoko left England and moved to New York. Then in 1972, John releases Sometime in New York City, which is a double album and a very political album containing songs like Sister, Oh Sisters, Angela, Attica State, John Sinclair, The Luck of the Irish, and others. The second disc is very strange. In June of the previous year, Frank Zappa invited John and Yoko to appear on stage with him at the Fillmore East. This is the same period that he was recording that infamous The Mothers at the Fillmore East album that I told you about in a previous episode. For Lennon's disc, John and Yoko took the original Mothers cover and doodled all over it. Side 1 was recorded in London. It only has 2 tracks, Cold Turkey and Don't Worry Kyoto. Side 2 was recorded with the Mothers. After Imagine hitting #1, his next album, Sometime in New York, is a failure. 1973 was a rough time for John. He and Yoko got separated. He moved to LA, and for 18 months he lived what he referred to as his lost weekend. His album for that year was Mind Games, an album that he describes as having no energy or direction. I like the title track, Asumasin, I'm Sorry, and on side 2, Intuition and Only People. Doing much better than Sometime in New York, Mind Games peaks at #9. 1974 finds John still trapped in the lost weekend, and there's one album that really shows this. He produced an album for Harry Nilsson called Pussycats. It was Harry's 10th album, and it is a wretched mess, and you could literally hear Nilsson destroy his vocal cords, which changed his singing from then on. That year also saw John release his own album, Walls and Bridges, which is a great album that contains 2 hit singles, Whatever Gets You Through the Night and #9, Dream. It went to the top of the charts, so it was John's second #1 album. The next album is Rock and Roll. This is an album that John had wanted to make for a long time. Here he gets to cover classic old rock and roll songs. It's a fun album, but boy does it have history. When the Beatles recorded Come Together for Abbey Road, publisher Morris Levy sued Lennon for copyright infringement. The suit was settled out of court, with Lennon agreeing to record 3 songs owned by Levy on his next album, which was to be a rock and roll cover album. However, when John started to record that album, he had Phil Spector producing it, and Phil wigged out and stole the master tapes and vanished. So John went ahead and recorded Walls and Bridges and released it first. Morris Levy was furious, as Lennon had broken their deal. John explained the circumstance and set about recording Rock and Roll, in large part to placate Levy. He even sent a rough mix of the tapes to Levy to show him that progress is being made on the record. Morris took the rough tapes and told Lennon he would release them and sell it directly on TV. When EMI and Capitol found out, they persuaded Lennon, since he still had a record contract with them, that he had to refuse Levy's deal. But Morris Levy was no pushover. If you'd like to read more about him, pick up the book Me, the Mob, and the Music by Tommy James. It's a great read. When Levy found that Lennon was backing out of the deal, he became incensed. He quickly released the album as Roots. John Lennon sings the great rock and roll hits, and he sued Lennon, EMI, and Capitol for $42 million for breach of contract. Eventually, the court ruled that Levy was due $7,000 in damages. Lennon got $42,000, and EMI and Capitol got $109,000. And John's rock and roll album, it reached number 6 on the charts. And by the way, Levy's rip-off album only pressed 3,000 copies, most of which were destroyed by court order. So if you find one, it's rare. John then takes a 5-year hiatus to become what he described as a house husband and to take care of his newborn son, Sean. In 1980, he and Yoko release an album, Double Fantasy. The album has 7 songs by John and 7 by Yoko. Standouts are Just Like Starting Over and Beautiful Boy on side 1, and Watching the Wheels and Woman on side 2. Double Fantasy becomes John's 3rd number 1 album. It was released shortly before his death in 1980 by a deranged fan. 1984 sees the release of the last studio album that John Lennon ever recorded, Milk and Honey. It was recorded during the Double Fantasy session, and it was imagined to be the follow-up album. But after John's death, it took Yoko 4 years to complete the album. The cover has the same photo that's on the cover of Double Fantasy. On that album, it's in black and white, and on this album, it's in color. The music is good, but I think Double Fantasy is better. John Lennon started his solo career by being nude with his girlfriend. Then he made 11 more albums. Okay, let's rank those albums. John Lennon's worst album, in my opinion, no question, coming in at number 12, is Unfinished Music, number 2, Life with Lions. This is just an embarrassing record. Not much better than that, coming in at number 11, is the Wedding album. Again, if you're a collector, you gotta have it. But you won't listen to it. At number 10, Unfinished Music, number 1, Two Virgins. Moving to number 9, Sometime in New York City. So moving to number 8, Milk and Honey, John's last album. In number 7, Live Peace in Toronto. Here we get to hear John Lennon playing live for the first time in many years. At number 6, Rock and Roll, John belting out all those oldies. Number 5, Mind Games. Number 4, Double Fantasy. Number 3, Walls and Bridges. Hey, it's got 2 number 1 hits on it. And in the number 2 slot, Plastic Ono Band, John Lennon Plastic Ono Band, a classic record. And in the number 1 slot, John Lennon's best album, no question, Imagine. I'm certain you don't agree with my rankings. So if you'd like to go down to the comments and put your list, I'd love to see them. In the meantime, we'll all be singing harmony to John's songs. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out. Thanks for watching, and keep a rockin'. Most of the albums that I talk about can be found at your local vinyl store or on eBay. Individual songs most likely are on Spotify, Apple Music, or Amazon Music, or even some on YouTube.